is a class that shall not be named. We're here with an exciting crew of people from all over the world, actually. We have welcome to Lou and Ron and Flossie and Arlene, and of course, Karen and Eva and Paul and everybody watching on YouTube, and David all the way from England.
You guys can move this way, all three of
Coming back in right now. And hope everybody's well. Special thank you to Karen and Stuart, who will be two of our main thespians for Sunday's Purim Spiel at 11:45. They were excellent in rehearsal last night. And what we're going to start doing is go back to some personalities. And what we decided is we would do biblical personalities first. And so we're going to do a week or two or three on women in the Bible. Look at some of the more prominent ones, some of the ones that aren't as much so. And then we'll go from there to look at some of the guys. And obviously, it's a perfect time to start talking about the women of the Bible because we have a holiday, which is centered, of course, on one of the biblical books named after a woman. And obviously, it's the book of Esther, one of only two books that are named after a woman. The other one is obviously Ruth. The one on Ruth is even more centered, obviously, on the women than Esther. But Esther is a very interesting story. As we all know, it is the greatest farce maybe in history. And it has morphed into a holiday unlike most holidays, certainly in our religion. Hanukkah now obviously is kind of taken over as the party holiday. But for generations, it has been Purim, the holiday where you make fun of the tragedy. And so we're going to go over a little bit about Esther and the story. It is an attempt in many ways to put the Jewish people into world history as we're putting ourselves into the Persian Empire and actually centering the story on what may be a Persian king, maybe Xerxes the First. That's what most people believe, during the 5th century BCE. And we have, of course, this incredible story. And I think many of us know the story, but we also understand the significance and unique nature of it. One, it's named after a woman. Two, the woman is the hero. Three, most appropriately, and I talked to Flossie about this. Flossie did an event on the unusual aspects of Purim and of Esther and the book of Esther. And what were some of them, Flossie?
Well, the one that intrigued me the most is how God is not mentioned.
It's the only book in the Bible, maybe one other kind of you can say, but really it's the only book in the Bible where God is not mentioned. Not only that, there's very little religiosity. It mentions that they're Jews. Actually, it's the first time we see the word Jew, but you never see them doing anything religiously Jewish in it. I mean, she does fast before I think she goes to see him, but besides that, the persecution is not because of their beliefs or because of their traditions. The persecution is based upon one guy who doesn't like these people because they won't bow down to him. So the only religious part really is they won't bow down to a human being, which is not such a big deal because he's an awful human being. We see that it is a story in which is essential in many ways to Judaism because we struggle with the idea of God. In the ancient world, gods were tied to the land. We get kicked out of our country. The temple's destroyed. Every other group of people would simply have given up their religion and taken on the idols of the other groups. You're banished, your God has no power. So for the first time, we leave this land and we then do the opposite. Not only do we cement our belief system, we improve it. By going away from Israel, we say, well, God is the God of everything. It's not God that was defeated. It is just what happened. And this is the story, one of the few, because when we go into exile first in Babylon and then Persia, we don't know a lot what goes on. There's no real story. So there's only these later stories, mainly Esther, Daniel, Nehemiah, Ezra, that teach us a little bit about what's going on. And this is a farcical story about the bad guy who is wearing an obvious black hat, the bumbling king, the hero man, and then they add the main hero is a heroine who's a woman. And so it's really quite a wonderful story. And first, obviously, the mere fact that this king is having a party for years, he basically just parties all the time. He is not brightest bulb. He does not run the country. He just parties. He has a beauty contest that lasts over a year to find his wife. He has a grand vizier who is an awful human being and is doing his own thing. And so then we come to the story of Esther. She, of course, is the queen, but we know in a lot of societies, being the queen is not necessarily that important of a post. And it doesn't always necessarily come with privileges and rights. And we don't know what her rights or privileges are. We know she's the queen. We know he's mesmerized by her a little bit. But we also see from the point of the story that a queen is not what you would call Queen Elizabeth. She is not necessarily someone who is naturally powerful. And so it is incumbent on us to first, as modern readers realize that this is not like a regular queen in the modern world who has some power connection. This is the wife of the king, a young wife at that, who doesn't have probably the political power that a queen who's been around for a long time and is very cunning will have. What's the name of the movie with Katharine Hepburn and Peter? What's his name from where they're the king and queen and they're bouncing off each other? They're so clever. From
The Lion in Winter? Is that The Lion in Winter?
Lion in Winter, yes, that one, where you have this brilliant queen matching wits with a almost equally brilliant king who obviously has only the advantage of being a man and a king. This is not the king we're talking about. This is a bumbling idiot. And we have a woman who is very young and doesn't understand really how to use her power as queen. And so,
how old is she? How old is Esther, supposedly?
That, I don't know. She's probably, I think, around 18-ish.
Okay.
She's really young. I don't remember if it gives I should look that up. I don't remember if it gives her exact age.
She keeps saying young, and I wondered how young is.
But again, that was not uncommon. If you were going to have children, you usually got married young for, obviously childbirth was very dangerous back then. And also people didn't live that long. You lived in your 30s if you're So Mordecai learns of the plot that Haman wants to destroy the Jews. And he tells Esther. And obviously Esther is Jewish. She's been hiding it. But she realizes that her connection to the king is not strong enough to really make a difference, but she has to make a difference anyway. And so she uses intellect. What we see in the Bible often of women who are leaders is they use whatever is in their power. Women are not given the same type of power, so you have to use intrigue. We'll talk about that. And that's what she does. She stretches out what's going on. She unassumingly goes to the king, not to tell him what's going on, but to invite him to a party. Because what is this king like? He likes parties.
Parties.
And she's throwing a party. She's invited Haman to this party, and he's very privileged to be invited to the first party of the queen, giving for the king. Then after the party's over, another party. She doesn't break it down right in the middle of the first party. Let me throw you another party. You're so awesome, and you're the king. And then it's the second party where she springs on what's going on. She's fasted. She, according to the text, her life is at risk for interrupting the king, which she has done. And obviously the book ends with her as the hero and as Haman and his family being killed. Not only that, obviously it puts Judaism into the forefront of the international world, because now obviously descendants of Xerxes, the great Xerxes I, are Jewish. So there's Jewish bloodline in these kings. So this is a very powerful book from the Bible that is created as a holiday. It's really the only book that is used as the holiday basis completely. I mean, the whole holiday is based upon this book. We obviously, the book of Ruth is read for Shavuos, but Shavuos is a ancient holiday, and the book is just read there, whereas Purim is based entirely on this one book. Not only that, it's interesting to see that a book can become such an integral holiday within religion when it's not based upon the Torah. Because remember, the Torah holidays are the ones that are really considered the holiest. Any holiday afterwards is not on the same level. Purim is as close as you can get because it is in the Bible, and there is a fasting involved, but it is not a holiday where you don't work. And it's interesting that this book was chosen because it's really not religious in any way, except for mentioning she's Jewish and he's Jewish, and that they won't bow down to somebody, and that she fasts. There's really very little religious implications. It's more about Jews surviving in the outside world and how we can go into the outside world and remain Jewish. We can acculturate, maybe even assimilate. It's about how persecution is part of the world in a way we don't always see in other places yet, because religious persecution is not really anything that we find in the world really probably till the Hanukkah story in the 3rd century. So what we see here is not really religious persecution in the same way we think of it from the last 1,000 years. They're not being persecuted for their beliefs. They're being persecuted because this one guy won't bow down to this one other guy, and so he resents everybody. This is a vengeance hatred. This is not a religious persecution in the same way we see other places. And so the fact that this not only made it into the Bible, but also became a major holiday is really a testament to the rabbis who chose these books, trying to give a broader view and making sure nobody knows for sure the reason this book's chosen, but I think many people would think it is chosen to show that we can live outside of Israel, that we live outside in the rest of the world, that God is not centered on any landmass, that our God can't be killed, that our God was not defeated. And this is proof. Once we go into exile, whereas other cultures assimilate and disappear, our culture actually probably became stronger religiously. We probably became stronger religiously because of the destruction of the temple, because now we have to cement our beliefs. Now it's time to say we're going to be Jewish or we're not. You can't do this middle thing anymore. There's no temple. And we say, yeah, we can be Jewish. And obviously we become actually Jewish, Jews. This is where the word comes from, as the exile, probably from the tribe of Judah. So it is also very apropos to our world today in America, because Judaism is not seen just as a religion, but as a tradition, not even as an ethnicity. It is a connection to the civilization of Judaism, not just the religion of Judaism. And for those of us who live, not really us, because we're all connected to the religion through our beliefs and through the connection of the synagogue. For people out there who say, I'm Jewish, but not part of a synagogue or part of the religion, this is really where it says it's okay to do that. Preferable not to, but it says you can be Jewish and be a good human being without only solely being part of the religion. And that's also important, because Esther and Mordecai don't seem to be religious, but they seem to be very secure in their Judaism. So it's a fabulous story. Rabbis chose it, but of course they're not always so excited about it. You know, when they see a nice Jewish girl marrying somebody who's not Jewish, that is not always what is supported by Judaism, but it's also is here, and it's an interfaith marriage, and we don't see her keeping kosher, and so it's important to see that there is not a whole 100% support of Esther because of this, but that yet it was chosen to be in the Bible, yet it's chosen as a holiday, and I think a lot of it has to do with it, probably mostly because of the history it represents. There's just not that much in history for us after the destruction of the temple. You've got the book of Daniel, as I said, you got Nehemiah, Ezra, and Esther, and sort of Ruth. And so it's really important to see how this is one of the great female heroes, and we're going to be celebrating her. Now, what is also essential for us to remember is that there is another woman in this story. And of course, that is Vashti. And Vashti is kind of like Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
She's bigger today than she was during her time. Like Hamilton has made a huge comeback. He's bigger today than he was at that time. He was villainized. I mean, he was a very important player, but he's got a Broadway hit and everybody knows who he is. He's probably more well-known today than Benjamin Franklin. And Vashti in the story, if you view it from a different period in time, you look at it very differently. What is Vashti become to us today? How do we look at Vashti? Today, when we do Purim spiels about Vashti, she's not the poor wretched woman who's getting kicked out because she's full of herself. She won't dance naked in front of her king. In the book, it's made in many ways to make it look like she's wrong. She needs to do what the king says. That's what you're supposed to do. That has changed in the last 30, 40 years, 50 years. She has become now a heroine herself. And she's basically a nonconformist, a women's rights advocate. She dies probably for beliefs that women shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to dance naked for my husband and his drunken friends. And so she is a feminist. And she's now bigger than ever, because anytime you do Purim spiels or you talk about her from the more conservative, reform, reconstructionist point of view, she is now much portrayed in a much, she's as much of a hero as Esther, sometimes even more. Flossie.
When I learned about Vashti going back years ago, I never heard about her being asked to dance naked. They just didn't say it. When you're teaching children today in the Sunday school, Hebrew school, did they hear that she was asked to do that, or it just slipped by?
No, I mean, these are easy stories to change. You just say, King wanted her to dance and do all these things, and she didn't want to, and she decided that it was more important to have her say and to set a precedent. Now, obviously, we don't know what happened to her, but obviously there's only two things. She was either banished or killed, most likely killed, but that was the way of the world. But what we do see is today she is a hero across the board in many respects, and is really as important to the story for us in our modern take as maybe even Esther herself, maybe even more so. So when we do the spiel on Sunday, her character is Cher, basically. She is like, I'm Cher, I'm doing my thing, and I'm not going to listen to you treat me this way. Anybody remember? Oh, sorry, Karen?
No, I was going to ask a question before. What time period was this? Do we know?
The time period that's set is probably the 5th century. So about 100 years, the 400s.
But CE, I mean.
BCE, yeah.
BCE, okay.
So like 100 years after the destruction of the first temple.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So pre-Hanukkah,
Okay.
during this period, the Israelites have been invited to go back. So some Jews have gone back to Israel, rebuilt the temple. The more prosperous Jews probably stayed in Persia, because obviously that was a big cultural area. And so this is what's going on. Now, with Esther, we have, of course, this hero, we have a story, but we'll go to some other women in the Bible. Not all of them are Jewish. In fact, some of the most important women in the Bible aren't Jewish. So if we're going to go and talk a little bit about women in the Bible, you've got to start somewhere. And there's only one place you can really start, and that was with the first woman of all time. And obviously, that's Eve. Eve, we could do an entire college course on over a semester easily. The character of Eve has become part of the culture of so many religions in so many ways, and is ever changing. She is, in many ways, the femme fatale of history. She has been used as a means to abuse women, to imprison women, to limit their access to education. She is the temptress in some places, the woman who got Adam kicked out of the Garden of Eden. She is the personification of evil in some cases. So throughout history, she has been used in nefarious ways. And I think we all have heard how some of them have been done. It's very obvious. The serpent convinces her to trick Adam to get him kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And it's all her fault. Today, we don't blame her in our modern sensibilities, but in ancient times, through the last 100 years ago, she was the one blamed. And she also has had a renaissance, not as much as Esther, but certainly she is looked at very differently than she was 150 years ago in some cases. So let's go over a little bit about Eve, the first woman. I'm working on some jokes about her and Adam. Flossie.
Quickly, before you go into Eve, a question. The idea of Hamantaschen, was that a dessert at that time and we kind of incorporated it? I know what they call it, his hat or his earrings.
It does become a dessert, but originally it was probably some sort of like pastry with meat in it, probably. Desserts are a lot more popular today, obviously, with our access to sugar, but the actual Hamantaschen has been around for a while. It's just changed as to what it is. That would be something interesting to look at. I can look at that for next week to see the evolution. But yes, it's same thing with like, there's another, I forgot another thing we eat that's changed over. Anyway, for Hanukkah, what is the food? And yeah, that's changed over time as well. because sugar is awesome and because we're all addicted to it. And I have given up any pretenses of saying I'm not, or any attempt to stop eating it all the time. That is just me. I'm sure all of you have really good control. I do not. So let's go to the story of Eve, and this will probably take up a lot of time. Eve is obviously, Eve and Adam are amazing characters. And I'm trying to think of some jokes. I think it's a good place. You know, they were married for 900 years. I can do something about how many mistakes that Adam has made through that time period and what, you know, and how. But I think the best part about Adam and Eve is the freedom of not having in-laws. You know, obviously, no in-laws to deal with.
Yeah,
Is that a pretty good one? That one's gonna go into my set. The best thing about Adam and Eve, I will use mother-in-law because mother-in-laws are funnier when you say it in a setting, but they didn't have, you know, mother-in-laws. So if you want to read some really interesting takes on Adam and Eve, Bruce Feiler is a member of our congregation, maybe behind me, wrote a book about it, which is really fabulous. He is such a good writer and really succinctly. But when we talk about the story, obviously we wonder, excuse me one second.
We talk about choices. Adam could have.
A little low blood sugar. I'm going to get a little candy because I talked about sugar. So we look at Adam and Eve. The first question obviously is, where did the other people come from? I mean, you can't create a society based on two people who have one son, three sons, and one of them dies. So obviously, Adam and Eve are the direct line to Judaism. So there are other places that people are created. They come straight to us. So they're vegetarian. I apologize for eating, but
We don't want you to pass out.
I know. They're vegetarians. So a lot of people believe to be Jewish fully, we need to eventually be vegetarians. What's the problem? Problem is, I love sushi. That's the problem. Problem is, we live in America and we love beef and chicken. So, but in the text, they become friends with the animals. The Garden of Eden, of course, becomes the representation of heaven. We know that it's not an apple. It was probably a date or a fig. So little things like this. But more importantly, when you look at the relationship, I'm going to get one more of these because they're so good.
Speaking of weakness, which
What is he getting?
Oh, funny. He could share it with us, you know.
I usually get candy. I can't really eat these because of but I'm so hungry. So
What are you eating?
I have a Snickers bar. I just need.
Snickers. Okay, just wondered.
So when we look at Adam and Eve, we look at the relationship. And it's really interesting. I'm going to read some quotes from Feiler, Bruce Feiler. Think about our own relationships with our families, friends. It can be spouses. What do we use to create our relationship with our spouses and our friends? We use our experiences of our present. You know, we use our parents as models for our relationship. We use our uncles and aunts and grandparents. We use what we see and what we read. Everything we do is based upon our experiences with other people. What's the problem here? They don't have any experience with anybody. They are completely fresh. They're making it up as they go along. They have no experiences to base anything on. It is a very unusual relationship. It was singular in its nature. because there's nothing behind them. There's only stuff going forward. It is creating the idea of a couple without any ancestors to teach them what to do. There's no, and I love this, what Bruce Fowler says, they can't steal someone else's pickup lines or dance to anyone else's love songs. They must write their own story. They must invent what it means to be in a relationship. Most couples begin separate and come together. However, in this case, what happens? Adam and Eve begin together and then they move apart.
Start separate, yeah.
They move apart as they create the relationship. They start naked and then get dressed, which is the opposite. So they are created fully grown. They have no history. So Eve is the embodiment of the original woman. And she is used in many ways as a tool to keep women down throughout history. And he goes through some really interesting things in ancient society. In ancient society, women held a much higher profile, I guess, than they did later on, because they can look at gods, which gods are prayed to. Women, female gods are higher up. And Bruce Feiler talks a lot about how in hunter-gatherer societies, there's no central power. So everybody has their own gods. Women have a major role to play, working, raising the family, because you're kind of living in hunter and gathering. You're not working all day farming. But when we move to farming,
Sedentary.
and then start creating societies, there's more pressure on resources. You start having class systems as opposed to just family systems. You start having stuff because you want stuff, because you're staying in one place, whereas you're moving around, you can't have stuff. Class becomes more important than kinship. Women are not physically as strong, and they start being isolated more and start having more of a supportive role. The female gods start having less importance. Plus you have wars, you have kingdoms, you have a need for power, which is much more systemic seemingly in men for whatever reason. That may be chauvinistic to say, but that's what history dictates or tells us. And so this woman, we know the story. We don't know if the story itself is originally created to bind women in any way, make them look bad. Probably not, because you can look at it from a lot of perspectives. But it is used as a way to subdue women in many respects. You are an Eve. You are Delilah. You are the trickster working with the serpent. Or at best, you're so naive or ignorant or not smart enough to realize you're being tricked in such an obvious way. That teaches us that maybe women aren't evil, but that they're inferior intellectually. And this is how the Eve story has been used blatantly in history. We don't see it as much today because during our lifetime, really she's gotten, her reputation has improved, certainly in the last 150 years, as women have been able to become literate and so forth. But still, it's pretty bad. I think obviously she is used as the temptress more than anything else. And so what we see though now is a reworking of her character. And in many ways, it is very interesting. And I always point back to this because it's one of my favorite radio broadcasts. I talk about it all the time. Mae West, Don Amici. They do a radio show about Adam and Eve. She is, you can go on YouTube. She's banned from radio for 20 years because of it. She's blackballed off radio.
Wow.
Because she makes Eve out to be sultry. Not only that, Eve in this story wants to leave the Garden of Eden because it's boring. She wants to eat from the tree of good and evil because she wants to learn. She's not tricked by the snake. She's working overtly with the snake. Her husband is kind of dull. Eat from this tree and you will be more interesting to me. We're going to go see the world, buddy. There's more to see. And obviously, because it was Mae West and she's so sultry and it's the 1930s, she gets banned. Her reputation, actually, it enhanced her reputation getting banned, I think, because she was a little bit farther along in her career already. But yes, Flossie.
I'm sorry. You see, I see it differently. We've been taught, and maybe it's a comment about today, life is choices and we have free choice. Here was Adam. We're not making it that he went and made that he was weak. And here they're saying she tempted him. Life is choices. He could have ignored it if he was so strong as we're saying, and the wife was the weak one. I mean, nothing is said about him being weak and just going along with it.
And that is exactly how the best way for us to look at it today. And it has been manipulated to look at the opposite, that a nice boy is tricked by a evil woman. And that is what we see the story played over and over time. The woman tricking the guy into doing something wrong or leading him astray. Now, obviously, I don't believe this is the way it's supposed to be looked at, but this is what we've seen throughout history. And when, it was very controversial, I think, to put Eve in the Sistine Chapel. Bruce Feiler talks about this. That Michelangelo really had to overcome a lot to get that even in there. So what we see, though, is that Eve is so much more and can be looked at from so many different perspectives. Today, we look at her more from the Mae West perspective. Like Flossie said, it is a choice. Adam and Eve chose to leave the garden. Why? For many reasons. One, maybe it was meant to be. Human beings aren't supposed to live in the Garden of Eden because you don't make good decisions in the Garden of Eden because there are no good decisions. You have to have bad decisions to make good decisions. So any decisions in the Garden of Eden are neither good or bad because you've not eaten from the tree of evil or good and evil or knowledge of good and evil. So in order to be human, you have to leave the Garden of Eden to try and get back there. And the best way to get back there is making good decisions. From that perspective, Eve is more of a heroine, although you can look at it from either. For us today, we look at Eve a lot better than most people have throughout history, certainly in our perspectives. But she still is looked at as the temptress. And it's also important to remember the theme of the Bible when it comes to women. And this really helps us understand how probably this should have been read differently. The women who do great things are often women who are powerless, who find ways, sneaky ways, to get things done. Esther, Ruth, Hannah, Shiphrah Puah, Tamar. The list goes on because they don't have inherent power. They have to use intelligence and trickery. Rebecca, and we'll go over some of these. And it all starts with Eve. Whether you look at her good or bad, that's up to you. But when we see this story, we also see it as about love. Because once they leave the garden, they stay together for 900 plus years. And we talk about the mistakes they make. Eating the apple, one son killing the other. But what do we see throughout the relationship? They stay together. They're a cohesive unit. And it speaks about how Eve and Adam have to overcome a lot of issues and remain together. In many ways, it's the greatest love story in history. that is what we see. And that's why it's used now more than ever as a love story. Because they have flaws. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. And yet they stay together. Not only that, after the tragedy of losing their son, one son's killed, the other one is banished, they have another son. They have a belief that they might, Seth, that they have to continue life and to train the next generation, even despite these terrible things going on. And that is a beautiful way of looking at it. It is much more romantic in many respects than I think a lot of relationships were looked at in ancient times. This is not a marriage of convenience, or maybe it is at the beginning, but it becomes a marriage later of a true relationship. And we see that throughout the Bible, that even though, you know, you're often set up with your spouse, that in terms of the relationships, we see a lot of love, probably a lot more there than in later times. I mean, Abraham and Sarah, Rebecca and Isaac, Jacob and Rachel. I mean, Ruth and Boaz. The list goes on and on. And so it's a wonderful story if you look at it from that perspective and ignore the Eve is evil perspective, which has really been part of the world. So any thoughts on this, by the way? Really, if you have a chance, Don Amici, and
Mae West.
And Mae West, and it's not very long. It's like 20 minutes, and there's a lot of overtones or undertones. You know, she basically says, I have too big of a personality to be stuck here. And you think about what we see today in TV and in the movies, and it would be no big deal at all. But back then, apparently, it was a huge deal. So, Don Amici, Flossie.
Do the Christians feel the same way about Adam and Eve as we're questioning now?
Well, I think what we see now is from the perspective of Judaism and Christianity, there's been a lot of similarity. Not with original sin, obviously there's a big difference there, but in who Eve is, yes. I think Judaism and Christianity, from a very male-centric position, have looked at Eve in this negative light for a very long time. And it's changed quite a bit, but I think we all see that it's getting better, but still a lot of the world looks at Eve and women from a certain perspective. One, conniving, not as smart, treacherous, using her feminine wiles to convince men to do things they shouldn't do, getting men in trouble. This is what we see continuously. And our President Ron is here. Hey, President Ron.
Hi, Ron.
And so,
Hi, the other Ron.
Ron says hi to Ron.
Ron, the other Ron?
That's the other Ron here. Everybody.
Hi, Ron.
Hi. Well, how many you got there?
We have about 6 or 7 here on Zoom and a few more on YouTube.
Okay, I'll listen to you too.
All right. So Eve is therefore a major character in history, probably the biggest, maybe the biggest woman character. I mean, the most talked about woman character in history, probably. And because all societies, not all, lots of societies have a female origin story, and this is hers. So, and I love, if you want to read the book by Bruce Feiler, I think it was called Adam and Eve, A Love Story. I had it here. I have it if anybody wants to borrow. It's really, really well written, and or the first love story. So we'll have maybe time for one more. Any questions about Eve? Again, we're just testing the waters on a little bit of each of these. But Eve, again, we talked about Eve and Esther, which could be entire courses just onto themselves. But we'll do one more if that's okay, if we have time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, and the next one we'll do one with a shorter span. And I love using these characters because they, again, also become so much more prominent in today's world than they were biblically, and that's Shiphrah and Puah. These are the famous midwives during the time of Moses. Pharaoh said, first of all, Pharaoh's saying we're going to stop the population by killing the men. Very interesting choice, considering that women actually birth children. I assume Pharaoh understood that, but I could be wrong, you know. So these are the two midwives who refused to kill the Jewish children, or Hebrew children. And when Pharaoh goes up to them, literally the God King comes up to them and says, what happened? Why are they still alive? They say, they lie to his face. So the Hebrew women are so strong that they have their own babies and we don't need to deliver them, basically. So these two women lie to Pharaoh himself. We don't know to this day if they were actually Jewish or Hebrew, or were they Egyptian? Why? Because when you say Hebrew midwife, you can look at it from different perspectives. Somebody who is Hebrew and a midwife, or someone who administers as a midwife to Hebrews. So we don't know if they were Egyptian or if they were, so they could be what we would call righteous Gentiles, or they could be Jewish. We don't know. So, but what is incredible is the act of lying is something, you know, no big deal to us. We lie all the time, except for me, because I'm a rabbi. But I told my wife the other day, I said something like, I'm pretty honest. Have I ever lied to you? And my wife said, well, I've never caught you in a lie. So that could go either way.
Right.
But from the perspective of this society, lying to the God King is probably a big offense and probably takes a lot of strength, whether they were Hebrew midwives or whether they were non-Hebrew midwives. They took their job seriously. They were there to help these babies be born. And that is what we see they do. So we don't know what else is going on. Were they upset at Pharaoh for something else? What happens to them? We assume that they're putting their lives at risk by doing this. It seems very sensible that if somebody's willing to kill boy babies, that person will be willing to kill the midwives who don't do what they are asked to do. But it's really quite incredible that these two women who are now lionized have nothing negative about them. It's very rare. Very few characters in the Bible have nothing negative about them. But also the more major of a character you are, the more blemishes you have on the record. But there's nothing negative said about them. Very few beings have nothing negative said about them. So they are what we would call righteous women with a small part, but with no negatives, which again is incredible. And that is why we lionize them today. This is it's kind of like, non-violent revolt. They're not doing anything overtly. They're just standing their ground and against Pharaoh himself. And in a society where women probably did not have a lot of power, these two women who are not royalty in any sense of this imagination stand up for, one, their beliefs, two, for saving these kids. And they are, to this day, true heroes in our religion. And so even from the rabbinical standpoint, almost never anything negative about them. And again, we don't know what happens to them. They're only there for 2 short paragraphs. We don't even know if they were slaves or if they were, free Egyptian citizens. Let's shift from
They can appear again. They don't appear again?
They are
just-
mentioned later on, but no, they don't really appear again. They're mentioned in other places throughout Jewish history, but more talking about what they did. I mean, so it's really what some would say. Even Or Chaim was or HaChaim, which was a very famous sage in the 18th century, said basically every Jewish baby born is because of them. Basically, they saved the religion. Now, are they an amalgamation of other characters who did the same thing? A whole workforce of women who refused to do this? Who knows? But really quite impressive. So this is Shifra and Puah. You only find them couple lines in Exodus chapter 1. And really, that's it. All we know is we're handmaidens and their midwives. So any thoughts of those three? So we talked about Shifra Puah, we talked about Eve, and we talked about Esther. So very, very interesting stuff. Next week, we'll talk about maybe some others who are very well known as well. As what's coming up, obviously, Saturday night at 6 o'clock, we have the big Purim masquerade. It is going to be incredible. Hopefully people sign up. And Sunday at 9:30, we'll have the full Megillah reading we're doing with the Conservative Synagogue at Sunday School. But since it is actually Purim Day, everybody's welcome. And then at 11:45, Karen will be starring in our Diva Purim Spiel, which we practiced last night. Went really well. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. So that's what's coming up. Also, just to make sure we do have seders here. We have the women's seder, the men's seder. The men's seder is basically just drinking and eating. The women's seder is probably a little bit more spiritual and interesting. And then we have 2 seders the first and second night. They do get filled up. Members have priority over non-members, obviously. So if you plan to come to the first or second night seder here, sign up as soon as you can. The second night seder will be streamed if you want to have, but the first night will not. We always stream one of them. We're going to stream the second this year. And it has nothing to do with the fact that Hart and another group are playing that night and somebody wants to see them, not me. Just like Flossie and Ron.
No, let Ron go
Ron,
first.
please.
Yeah, we already got the email from Bob Greenberg about
Yes,
the
great.
status. So Arlene and I signed up already for the first night.
That's fantastic. And it's the best deal in town, $36 for a member. I mean, most seders, they charge $150 to $200 because we don't do it as a fundraiser. So it's a fabulous meal. Flossie.
I just wanted to share if people are interested. Yesterday, I saw a movie at Cinemark here called One Life.
What's that about?
It's a documentary, it's a true story, about a man in England, Nick Winston, who went and saved children with the Kindersport.
Oh, wow.
Anthony Hopkins is in it, and it's quite a movie that if you get a chance, I'm sharing with people that if a lot of people don't want to go to the movies, and I went and there were not many people.
Right, yeah.
So you don't have to feel, you're on top, but I highly recommend the movie One Life with Anthony Hopkins.
Great. We'll do that. And also coming up, we'll be promoting the Mighty Eighth is having a big event here where they're going to honor a soldier during World War II who protected Jewish POWs while in the camps.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so
Where is
it's going to be a
that,
free
Rabbi?
program we'll send out information. It's going to be a free program at the Mighty Eighth Museum
Great.
in April. So
Good.
So-
Yeah.
these are all good stuff. We also have regular services on Saturday. There will be no lunch on Saturday because they're preparing for the meal. So we got lots of stuff coming up. I just want to make sure you guys know about Purim and Passover. Karen.
No, and Stuart's reading the Torah portion Saturday.
And Stuart is reading on Saturday as well. And the Rachel, our cantor, is very happy because she's reading the Megillat Esther on Sunday. So she
Stuart's doing the Torah portion. And
All
he's
right, so-
performing in the Purim Spiel Sunday. So we have
he is
we have a busy
hangman.
Purim.
He's
is hangman
hangman.
with us.
All right, guys.
AKA Willie Nelson.
AKA Willie Nelson, AKA Stuart Blickstein. So everyone have a good one. Be safe,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Look forward to
Everybody
seeing
stay
you
well.
and have a safe, wonderful week. And I'll talk to you guys later. See you next week or hopefully this weekend.